Hey guys, welcome to my Halloween episode of Movies You Should Be Watching. For this list, I'm going to be recommending 13 movies because, ooh, spooky, scary. Yeah, you get the idea. Also, keep in mind, these are recommendations for movies I think casual moviegoers might not have seen, so you probably won't be seeing classic horror movies on here. For those of you who are curious, though, here's a quick list of my favorite scary movies for anyone who's interested. Now then, let's begin. First up on my Halloween list is a 2014 documentary called The Nightmare. This film was designed to draw attention to sleep paralysis and the bizarre shared hallucinations people who have this disorder go through. While I admit I don't like the way the filmmakers decided to structure the film, it was still very effective and did a great job setting a creepy atmosphere. If you've ever seen the Discovery Channel show A Haunting and enjoyed it, you'll probably enjoy this documentary as well, even though this movie focuses a bit more on the interviews rather than the recreations. The effects, while minimal, were really cool, and while I don't have sleep paralysis, I imagine the visuals presented here came pretty close to showing what these people see. While this movie isn't something to show your friends to give them a good scare, it was really informative and very, very creepy. Check it out.
I began hearing voices and screams and crying and all of this really emotional drama, yelling to crying, but all negative emotion. All of these different voices. And then that is when the shadow man would come toward me. And he looked just like a three-dimensional shadow. Outline, just perfect.
And he would walk disjointed.
And he brought the vibration with him. It's as if it was emanating from him. And he would come towards me, and I would just feel that. I would hear all the sounds of hell, I don't know any other way to put it, and feel his awful vibration.
Next, I'm going to cheat a little bit and include two movies in one, the 2012 and 2013 anthology movies, VHS and VHS 2. I want to give the disclaimer, though, that you should not watch the entirety of either of these movies. Like the Creepshow movies, these movies are actually a collection of short films held together by a narrative frame story. Only some of the segments are actually good, so if you watch these flicks, these are the ones that are worth your time. That being said, however, it's really hard to say much about these movies without spoiling them because the segments are so short, but I do want to take a moment to applaud Hannah Fierman's performance in the Amateur Night segment. She's an incredibly talented actress in everything I've seen her in, and she's actually slated to reprise her role from that segment in a feature-length movie sometime soon. The filmmakers even uploaded an exclusive scene from this movie to YouTube, so click here to check it out. Point being, both of these movies have some fantastic scares in them, and the four that I recommended are definitely worth your time. As for the third movie, VHS Viral, just pretend it doesn't exist.
What? I have no idea what you're saying. Wait, hold on. Thanks, man. Hey, you wanna go meet some people over there? Cool, I like you too. So, do you ever come here before? Ah, okay.
Next we have the Iranian American flick A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. This one is more creepy and slow than it is scary, but it does a great job at drawing you in and freaking you out as it slowly progresses. The plot follows a young man named Arash who leads adult life taking care of his aging drug-addicted father until he meets a strange girl who has a dark secret. The lead actress, Sheila Vaughn, did a great job in her role, and her counterpart, Arash Marandi, was great playing off of her. Too few times in horror movies do you find well-fleshed-out characters, and this movie delivers them well. The lack of color was an interesting choice, and makes the creepy scenes even creepier by taking away what little warmth and light we would have had otherwise. It's movies like this that prove the vampire genre isn't dead, and trust me, it's a better love story than Twilight. Sorry. The next movie on this list is 1994's In the Mouth of Madness. Are you sick of horror movies that stay too grounded in reality? Then this one is for you. The plot follows an insurance investigator who's hired by a book publisher to track down their best-selling author after he mysteriously disappears. What follows is a slow descent into insanity as he begins to question whether the fiction of the author's work is actually reality. Like I said, much of the appeal comes from never fully understanding what the situation actually is. It's never definitively answered whether we're actually witnessing paranormal events or if we're just watching our main character go insane. Whichever it is, this flick is a great love letter to writers like H.P. Lovecraft and is definitely worth your time.
Do you want some too, buddy? He sees you. He sees you. He sees you. What?
Next is the 2013 Scottish film Under the Skin. This is a great example, for me anyway, of advertising for a flick being really misleading. I've seen one too many movies that have no plot, but they do have a lot of artsy shots, so they'll use the artsy shots in the trailer to make you think there's a lot going on when there really isn't. That's the impression I got from this trailer, but thankfully I was completely wrong. This movie is incredibly unnerving, and that's mainly due to a fantastic performance by Scarlett Johansson. She's playing an alien whose job is to harvest human skins, but she slowly begins to learn more about humanity and decides to seek to understand them. Not only is she perfectly cast as a temptress, but the role reversal that occurs when she discovers the true nature of humanity is really fascinating. The visual style and music go hand in hand to make an incredibly haunting atmosphere that will really unnerve you. On top of that, a lot of the actors in this flick were filmed candidly, which makes the performances even more believable. Under the Skin is a great flick and will leave you uncomfortable and disturbed long after it's done. Check it out. Up next is the 2007 anthology movie Trick or Treat. Imagine if you took Halloween and Sin City and smashed them together. The byproduct would be Trick or Treat. This movie is perfect for getting together a group of friends for a fun, scary night in, because every trope is covered and nearly every scary antagonist gets a chance to shine. Serial killers, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, zombies, and a great new face in horror, Sam Hain, the spirit of Halloween. Not only is this movie a giant love letter to the horror genre, but it's also a celebration of the holiday itself. As I've said before, this movie has a little something for everyone and is a must-see for any horror fan.
A school bus was on its usual route. But this wasn't your typical school bus. And they weren't your typical kids. There were 8 of them. And they were different. Troubled. disturbed. Every day, parents put their dirty secrets on this bus to be driven to a school miles outside of town.
3260. 3264. 3266.
But that day, the driver took a different route.
Wrong way. Wrong way.
Next on my list is the 1999 Japanese film Audition. This may be a gross generalization, but the Japanese are really good at making scary movies, and this is a perfect example. Thank God there's no awful American remake. Side note, this realization is common knowledge now, but anytime the US remakes a Japanese horror film, you can be almost guaranteed that the original is better. While I'm at it, here's a quick list of Asian movies that were remade for Americans that you should watch. The originals, mind you, not the remakes. But anyway, about Audition. I'm not actually going to tell you about this one, believe it or not. This movie is meant to be experienced without knowing anything about it, and in fact, I've already told you too much about it by telling you it's a horror film. All I'll say is that you should not eat anything before watching. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience. Director Takashi Miike is an amazing talent, and I'd consider him in the same caliber as John Carpenter, Dario Argento, Wes Craven, and all the other masters of horror. Which, by the way, Mick Garris, please bring back the Masters of Horror TV show. I know some of the episodes were a little lackluster, but when it was good, I loved it. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Audition. See it.
でももうこんなになってるじゃない。
やめろ。
Next is the 2015 movie The Witch. If you found yourself reading The Crucible in English class in high school, and for whatever reason you wished it was scary, then congratulations, your dream came true. It's hard to really explain why The Witch is effective, but I'd compare it to horror classics like Alien and The Thing. The idea of a threat that you cannot physically get away from is a great premise, and in this case, it's executed perfectly. The movie follows a Puritan family in 1600s America who were exiled from their colony and forced to live on their own. While living in the wilderness, they find themselves tormented by a witch who turns them against one another. When you're making a horror movie, or any movie really, that features children in leading roles, casting them correctly is a necessity, or else you run the risk of dragging your movie down with their inferior acting ability. Thankfully, that's not the case here. Each of the child actors do a great job, especially the boy, played by Harvey Scrimshaw, who really shines in a pivotal scene as we approach the climax. Overall, The Witch is great, and is definitely worth checking out.
After, Mother. Would that please you? I have brought a book for your mother. Will you look at it with me?
One moment now. Samuel is hungry. Oh, come, little son.
Flora? Flora?
Next is the 2014 movie It Follows. I'm going to be upfront and say that this movie has some flaws with its own mythology, but that doesn't get in the way of its fantastic execution. The movie is about a girl named Jay who finds herself being stalked by a strange force after a sexual encounter with a strange boy. The lead actress, Micah Monroe, is perfectly cast in her role as Jay. She plays the stress and paranoia that the part demands perfectly. Speaking of perfect aspects to this movie, the soundtrack by Rich Freeland is beautiful and perfectly instills the 80s vibe that this movie was going for. Like I said, this movie is far from flawless, but the flaws that are prevalent don't really detract from the viewing experience. It Follows is a great horror flick. Just be sure not to watch it with your significant other, as you may develop a case of scopophobia. The next movie on this list is 2000's Frailty. This one is more of a psychological thriller than a horror movie, but it'll keep you on the edge of your seat throughout a viewing. The story follows Matthew McConaughey as the son of a serial killer who confesses his dark childhood to an FBI agent when someone starts killing people in a similar manner to his father. Returning to the same point I made for The Witch, the casting for the child actors during the bulk of the movie's runtime was great, and Bill Paxton does a pretty good job as a potentially deranged man on a mission. It's hard to really elaborate more on this movie without spoiling its ending, but if you're looking for a movie that will disturb you without too much gore or traditional horror movie tropes, then check this one out.
He said he'd never been there before, but he had no problem finding it. God was leading him.
Cynthia Harbridge?
Yes? Dad, don't. Please don't.
Fenton, if I could spare you this, I would. But we are God's servants, and His will must be served. Afraid, son.
Next up is the 2007 Spanish found footage movie Rec, or Record, however you'd like to say it. In the same vein as the points I made about Audition, this movie was remade for American audiences under the name Quarantine. Do not watch Quarantine. Watch this one instead. Anyway, the movie shows documentary filmmakers covering the night shift of local firefighters. During one shift in particular, they find themselves quarantined in an apartment complex when the people they were sent in to help turn out to be infected with a zombie virus. As I said back when I discussed Creep in the first episode of this series, found footage is a little tricky to make effectively. Far too many times do you see the footage devolve into the camera wildly shaking back and forth while we hear unintelligible screams and other loud noises. And while I get that this is how any ordinary person would react in a situation like this, there's only so many times that I can tolerate it. Thankfully, even though this movie is guilty of tropes like this at times, it doesn't take away from the scenes that were very effective. This movie also spawned 3 sequels, and while I haven't seen them yet, they seem to be received pretty positively. So give them a watch if you enjoyed this one as much as I did.
Venga, Ángela.
Next is the 2005 British movie The Descent. If you're not afraid of small spaces or darkness, then watch this one. The film follows several women who go spelunking in an unexplored cave, which then collapses, trapping them with strange carnivorous creatures. Regardless of whether you know much about how movies are made or not, this movie is a marvel in set design, lighting, and cinematography. Everything is shot beautifully, and the minimal lighting puts you right in the cave with the characters, making you even more terrified as things worsen. The actresses were all fantastic, and with one or two exceptions, they do a good job of not fitting into the typical stereotypes that you'd find in a movie like this. I hate to use the same two movies in yet another comparison in the same video, but if you want something with the set design of Alien mixed in with the originality of The Thing, then you'll love The Descent. Check it out.
Dead animals. Hundreds of them.
This is not good, guys.
Can we get out of here? Which way?
Come on. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know?
There's no breeze. It could be any one of these tunnels. Take your pick.
Oh, fuck it. Hello!
Please.
Is there anybody there?
Hello!
And finally, we have the 1922 Swedish-Danish movie Haxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, by the way. It should go without saying at this point, but unless you have the tolerance for a nearly 2-hour silent movie, then you might want to skip this one. If that isn't off-putting to you, though, then you're in for a treat. The movie is based loosely on the studies of the Malleus Maleficarum, which was a guide for inquisitors to determine whether or not someone was a witch. The movie is told in 4 parts, which show the progression of dealing with what was deemed witchcraft and how our understanding of it has evolved over time. While some of the movie is admittedly laughable, it's worth noting that, at the time, the movie was banned from being shown in the US and was heavily censored most everywhere else due to various depictions of torture and nudity. It makes you wonder what people back then would think if we could travel back in time and show them movies like Saw, Hostel, or The Green Inferno. Anyway, if you're up for an interesting and creepy study into witchcraft, then you should watch this one. Well, there you have my list of Halloween movies you should be watching. Unfortunately, only 4 of the movies listed here can be found on Netflix. There seems to be an unfortunate amount of subpar horror movies that can be found on this platform, and hopefully they do a heavy overhaul of that genre sometime soon. In the meantime, I guess you'll have to settle for DVD edits. Or maybe even Shudder. That's not an advertisement, by the way. Shudder is just a pretty good service. Haxan, however, is considered to be public domain, and there are multiple versions of it on YouTube, as well as a downloadable MP4 on publicdomainmovies.net. I'll give you a link to it here, as well as in the description. And on that note, I hope you all have a happy Halloween, and I'll be sure to get another list to you guys sometime soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.